Members, it's 2:30 and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the Bills Committee. Let's invite the public officials to come inside the conference room. Members, please note that after the first meeting, the administration has provided an information paper on the assessment criteria for nurses with special registration or enrollment to migrate to full registration or enrollment. That is LC paper number CB brackets 4247/2024 brackets 01. Also, Mr. Edmund Wong, Professor Chen Wing Kwong, and Dr. An Meng Yu have issued a joint letter to the Bills Committee on 8th of March. That is LC paper number CB brackets 4304/2024 brackets 01, requesting that the administration amend the bill to include special schools as designated institutions so that they can hire nurses on limited registration or enrollment to alleviate manpower shortage. And the written response of the administration has been sent to members. It is LC paper number CB brackets 4349/2024-01. Also, we have received a submission from an individual hoping that this bill can cover nurses who have obtained their qualifications for registration in Australia. So we have in attendance today Mr. Elaine Mack, Mr. Derek Lee from the Health Bureau, Professor Agnes Terrari, Chairman of the Nursing Council of Hong Kong, Ms. Lucia Ko, and Ms. Harriet Chen of the Department of Health, and Dr. Danny Tong from the Hospital Authority. Thank you. So, regarding work-based assessment, the administration has provided a paper at the last meeting. And it is amended that for 8 brackets 1 brackets B, that if the performance is satisfactory, one can migrate to full registration or enrollment. So can the Nursing Council brief members on the document? Thank you. We have been working out the details. But as you may know, once we have discussed the issue further, we find out that there's some adjustments that have to be made. So with the first part, the curriculum of courses that are recognized by the Nursing Council should be broadly comparable. As for the core competencies, we will not only make use of the core competencies of the recognized courses, we will also set a criteria. So, for example, for these SRE nurses, that is nurses on special registration or enrollment, must pass the at least minimum criteria. The working group is still working on this at the moment. Apart from this, on the assessment method, it would be, as said, a work-based assessment. If we want to look into in detail the clinical professional competencies of nurses, we need to let assessors observe in person how the nurses work in a clinical setting. That should reflect the skills of the nurses in a real setting. So we right now think that the assessment must be clinical in nature, and as said, we would need assessors to observe in person the performance of the nurses. So this would relate to the assessors to be chosen. Right now, we are drawing up the qualifications and experience of the assessors required. And once we have fleshed out the details, this will be published. And these assessors would have to fulfill the requirements before they will be appointed as assessors. We will continue to monitor the assessments. If there are any cases that are in dispute, the Nursing Council will follow up on such cases. We will follow up with either the hospital authority or the Department of Health. The Nursing Council will require the authority or the department to provide more details. If necessary, we may ask the relevant authorities to conduct assessments starting from the very beginning. So apart from some criteria, we will also have to make sure that we will follow up on the cases to make sure the assessments are fair and are based on the needs of the Nursing Council. All right, thank you. Any members who would like to speak? I do not see any member who would like to speak. Well, excuse me, Professor Chen Wing-Kwong. Chair, I would like to respond to the letter. Oh, that would be the second item. So regarding the previous item, members do not have any comments to make. All right, as for the item about the joint letter issued by Mr. Edmund Wong, Professor Chen Wing-Kwong, and Dr. Amin Yu, does the administration have any response to the letter or additional response to the letter? Chair, we'll just answer members' questions if necessary. Thank you. Professor Chen Wing-Kwong. Thank you, Chair. We ask that the administration to include special schools as designated institutions. Having read the administration's response, we believe that an effective monitoring mechanism is definitely beneficial, but then I would like the administration to also explain this. So with them selecting the designated institutions, what factors would they consider? And with the RCHEs or RCHDs or nursing homes, do they have anything different compared to special schools? And it is said that right now the manpower ratio of nurses and students or the ones that require care, do they have such data? If they do not have such data, if they just make a grand sweeping gesture and say that special schools should not be included, or that it should not be covered by the bill, it is very irresponsible. So if that is the case, would you allow applications to be made by institutions? And if institutions are allowed to make applications, how long will it take for them to be included as designated institutions? If the process is too long, it may not be able to alleviate the manpower shortage in time. Thank you. All right, thank you. Administration, please. Thank you. We have been liaising with special schools as well. And to answer the question specifically, we have included in the bill Department of Health institutions, hospital authority institutions, as well as RCHEs, RCHDs, and nursing homes, because we have considered the fact that they have an acute manpower shortage and that they have a monitoring mechanism in place for the workings of nurses. And for the Department of Health and Hospital Authority in particular, as you may know, there is a specific mechanism for monitoring nurses, and I have explained that during the previous meetings. As for the institutions to be recommended by Social Welfare Department, we have been liaising with the Social Welfare Department, and we understand that Social Welfare Department would deploy officers to patrol these institutions and monitor the performance of nurses. For special schools, from the information we obtained, there is no such mechanism in place for monitoring. We understand that special schools need nurses as well. And let me just say this, the shortage of nurses is territory-wide. It is not limited to healthcare institutions. We hope that with this bill, when we have SRE nurses on special registration or enrollment, it will in general alleviate the manpower shortage of nurses, and in turn it will alleviate the manpower shortage of special schools as well. We will also liaise with the Education Bureau to see how we can provide assistance. And if they want to have non-locally trained nurses working in special schools as well, we will see how we can aid the Education Bureau in supervising the performance of nurses. We will also maintain liaison with the Nursing Council. We want to instill confidence in the sector that these nurses are competent, and we wish to send the same message to other sectors as well. Through doing these, we believe that the nursing sector is satisfied with the current framework. If necessary, we will include special schools as designated institutions. The process won't take long, but I think what matters is that we have to instill confidence in different sectors that this framework works. But again, we will liaise with the Education Bureau individually to see what we can do better. Thank you. Ms. Lam So-Wai, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not a member of the Bills Committee. Thank you for letting me speak here. As a social welfare worker, in the social welfare sector, we have close liaison with nurses. The Nurses Registration Amendment Bill is close to my heart. Do we really need registered nurses or enrolled nurses in some places? In some residential care homes for elderly persons or for people with disabilities, in traditional NGOs, there are both registered and enrolled nurses. In private hospitals, in private residential care homes, the situation may be different. A couple of years ago, we had a discussion for nursing care procedures. For example, drip, Foley, wise tube, dressing, etc. Do we really need enrolled nurses? Well, there's a lack of nurses for daycare, elderly care services, and for care services provided for PWD. There's a lack of these services. There's also a lack of door-to-door services. The social welfare sector is faced with a manpower shortage. So, do we have a position of senior health carers? They can perform simpler nursing procedures instead of nurses themselves. As I heard just now, there are non-locally trained nurses. We are trying to retain and attract talents to come to Hong Kong. So in the HA or in some organizations, we do need to think of ways to do so. A couple of years ago, we employed many enrolled nurses, but then it was difficult to retain these nurses unless there are undertakings. For example, when a nurse is a program worker or a clerical staff member, when you let that staff member study and become a nurse, otherwise you can't retain these nurses. It takes 3 to 5 years, and afterwards the nurses may leave once again. They may go to the private hospital, for example, so you can retain these nurses. The sector is also faced with difficulties. Not many nurses are willing to work in RCH, as they need to work on shifts. For instance, if I were a nurse, in my early 30s, I was still single, I could still work on night shift. But what if I fall ill? Do I need to change shifts with my coworkers? With a manpower crunch about nurses, staff members in the AED and other wards are still facing difficulties. The wards are jam-packed with patients. Well, let's put ourselves into the shoes of nurses. They are also professionals. They make contributions to society by providing medical healthcare services. On introducing non-locally trained nurses, we need to factor in the career path of nurses as well. Under the HA, please correct me if I'm wrong. In the past, people got promoted according to seniority. They may become APN or NO, but we don't have nursing officer today. We have APN instead. You need at least a master's degree or even a PhD. You need at least a master's degree to be promoted to APN. We don't have any NO now, but NO and APN receive different remuneration. But HAs is very good. What about NGOs? Not all NGOs have room to retain, to employ experienced nurses. Many nurses in the HA are working very hard. I know some nurses who have worked in the HA for a couple of years. They have limited room for promotion, so they have no choice but to further study in order to get promoted to APN. Is this an ideal pathway? I dare to say it is not. Let me give you an example. We need to take into account quota as well. How many enrolled nurses do we have right now? Many enrolled nurses want to become registered nurses, but there's a lack of school places at university. Many nurses work as enrolled nurses in NGOs. After a long period of time, they still can become registered nurses. They can study to become one. So there's a lack of room for advancement. Whenever there is an emigration wave, we lose talents once again. Apart from nurses in the GBA and nurses from overseas jurisdictions, we need to draw for talents as well as attract talents. We need to retain talents. Ms. Elaine Mack. Thank you, Chairman. On the division of work, I will relate to the LWB and the relevant department as well. I understand that they are conducting reviews from time to time. On training local talents and retaining local nurses, this is definitely high on the agenda. Apart from what members mentioned, that is apart from top-up programs, we'll see how the UGC and the self-financing sector can step up training efforts. Be it manpower or hardware, different institutions also face different constraints. So we can see how we can better support institutions. Thank you, member, for your comments. We'll work on it. Regarding how we can retain local nurses or talents, in the last meeting, the hospital authority also touched upon this issue. They briefed a member on the latest situation. Can we ask Dr. Danny Tong to give us more information? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Connie Lam, for your question. I'll answer a couple of questions regarding nursing operation in some residential care homes, such as wound dressing or washing the hair of patients. We have outreach teams. Training includes these issues. We have an aging population and chronic diseases getting more serious. We have an effective mechanism for different ranks of our staff who can perform these duties. On retaining talents, indeed, when some nurses start their nursing career as an enrolled nurse, the competition is getting more and more keen. So some young people may start their nursing career as an enrolled nurse. The hospital authority is aware of this situation. That's why we need to step up our efforts to give these talents upward mobility. In our supplementary paper in the last meeting, the HA's strategy is to provide more opportunities in the upstream. Like the MTRCL Airport Authority Town Gas, we have set up an academy, Hospital Authority Academy, from EN to RN conversion. CDUHK and Hong Kong U Space also offer these transition courses. We're trying very hard to allow young people to gain upward mobility. I hope my reply gives you peace of mind. So question and answers, 5 minutes. Mr. Lam Chen Sing. Thank you, Chairman. I'm not a member of this Bills Committee. In the last public hearing, some individuals were concerned about a ratio in relation to employing non-locally trained nurses to locally trained nurses. They want to secure job opportunities for locally trained nurses. The reply from the administration is that they'll definitely ensure job opportunities for locally trained nurses. Are there any concrete administrative arrangements, for example, for talent admission schemes? There are requirements. For example, a company has to put out advertisements for a certain period of time. If there is still a lack of manpower, then the company can engage foreign talents. Regarding another issue, I also related to the authority. There are new arrivals to Hong Kong. They've become Hong Kong residents. They used to work as nurses in the mainland. Some also have work experience in grade 3A hospitals, but they did not take part in the licensing examination of the Nursing Council in Hong Kong, or that they may have failed the exam. That's why they can't practice as nurses in residential care homes. Or they may not be able to practice as nurse, they may only be working as health workers. But with this mechanism, they can practice as special nurse or limited nurse. As long as the institution employs them, they can practice as special or limited nurses. So can priority be accorded to these group of people? Actually, they are Hong Kong residents as well. So in theory, if they meet your requirement, the RCHE should employ them as limited registered nurses first. Or if the HA identifies this group of people, the HK can also employ these group of people as special registered nurses. If there is still a manpower shortage, then the HA can introduce non-locally trained nurses. There can be job matching, job expo, to see whether new arrivals meet the requirements. There can be such services. Thank you.
All right, thank you. 2 questions. Measures to ensure job opportunities for locally trained nurses, as well as the other question. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. as I said earlier, the hospital authority and the Department of Health would definitely prioritize local employment when hiring nurses, regardless of what kind of registration or enrollment they're on. Also, I'm sure you may know the vacancies are multiple. They need to hire 300 to 500 additional nurses. So we are not worried that we can prioritize local employment. You may ask Dr. Denny Tong. They may grab every local graduate they can get. As for the other institutions, we have also communicated with the Social Welfare Department and the Labor and Welfare Bureau on this priority, and they are aware of that. We will try to flesh out the details of the arrangements in future. For those who are qualified and have worked in nursing, as said, we have a pretty acute manpower shortage in residential care homes as well. If they are qualified, residential care homes or nursing homes are more than willing to take them. And we have been liaising with the Social Welfare Department to see, upon passing of the bill, if there are administrative arrangements that can support the Social Welfare Department and the homes to make applications. But these persons would have to provide information to homes to make sure the homes can make applications to the relevant bureau or the Social Welfare Department. Thank you. Thank you. Also, as said earlier, we have received a written submission from an individual asking if the bill would include nurses who have obtained qualifications for registration in Australia. I believe a verbal response would suffice. And it is said that I think it relates to a particular clause about the qualifications. The non-local qualifications should be broadly comparable to a recognized training course of the Nursing Council. I want to ask in particular if you would look at the practicum hours. As we know, those qualifications in Australia or New Zealand would have much shorter practicum hours. Would the Nursing Council or the administration answer this question about whether the practicum hour will be assessed differently without the licensing examination? Deputy Secretary, thank you. We have recognized qualifications from Australia. Perhaps I'll let the chairman of the Nursing Council supplement my answer. Thank you. We, in the working group during our discussions, did not say which country is to be considered recognized per se. But if we have talked about how we are to deal with a scenario in which their individual has not taken adequate practicum hours. We have provided arrangements for the individuals to make up for the lost hours. We would recognize the hours of the individuals working in a clinical setting upon their graduation in overseas countries. They do not have to undertake extra hours in Hong Kong. We are fleshing out the details at the moment, however. Thank you. Ms. Chen Hoyun. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about some target numbers for the nurses to be hired and how much of a shortage do we have at the moment in both the public and private sector. We would have a focus on primary health care in future, and we would want to have people go to family doctors. So we believe more nurses will be needed in general because we would have to implement primary health care. So for example, if one gets to the age eligible for marriage, some nurses may choose family over work and would choose to go part-time or even not work at all. With the passing of the bill, how many nurses do you expect to hire in a short period of time? Of course, we want to look to those working in the Greater Bay Area, but in fact, the Greater Bay Area, the other Greater Bay Area cities are also looking to hire nurses trained in Hong Kong. So how can we compete for the nurses? And as I said earlier, I want to know how many nurses do we need to alleviate the manpower shortage. Otherwise, in future, if the administration continues to claim that there is a manpower shortage, it may be hard for the public to understand where the administration is coming from. And I think the worst case scenario would be the more senior nurses would choose to work in the private sector, and we only have the less experienced nurses choosing to work in the public sector. Thank you. Deputy Secretary, thank you. If we talk about Hospital Authority and the Department of Health, we have thousands of vacancies for nurses. We have set a target. We hope that in the next 2 years, the DH and the Hospital Authority will hire 300 to 500 nurses. Upon the passing of the bill, the two authorities will proceed with hiring as soon as possible. And as you know, with the RCH amendment bill last year, homes would have to hire an additional 418 nurses in the next 5 years. So upon the passing of this bill, we will definitely work to alleviate the shortage in both the Hospital Authority, Department of Health, and the homes. We are also working on the manpower projections for the healthcare sector, and we will report to the Council this year. Thank you. Sorry, I would like to make some clarifications. So for the Department of Health and the Hospital Authority, they have 300 to 500 additional nurses, and homes would require 480 additional nurses. So altogether, we would need approximately 1,000 nurses, correct? Also, I want to follow up on something. 300 to 500 nurses is not a small number. We also have to consider the fact that we want these nurses. It does not mean we can attract that many nurses to come to Hong Kong, because that would relate to the benefits and the package to be offered, as well as the working condition. So how will the administration make sure we can attract these nurses to come to Hong Kong? Thank you. We agree. which is why we have been maintaining liaison with the hospital authority to see if we have to review our recruitment strategy. But we should say this, with more nurses, it should be that the working condition of nurses should improve. And we would also want to try to attract more nurses that have worked in other Greater Bay Area cities. We will have the hospital authority provide strategies to help them adjust to their lives in Hong Kong. I'll perhaps let the hospital authority colleague provide supplementary information on this. All right, Dr. Tenny Tong, please. Thank you. To hire 300 to 500 additional nurses, it would only be the initial plan. If we have hired a good number of nurses, we may even hire more. And if we compare the remuneration and benefits packages in other regions to those of Hong Kong, we think we have quite competitive terms. So with the passing of the bill, we believe we can hire a great number of nurses. And we have quite a similar culture to other Greater Bay Area cities. We do understand that there is competition among Greater Bay Area cities, but then we have liaised with mainland authorities. We understand that we can make use of some exchange programs or have nurses on limited registration or enrollment RRE nurses to tide over the manpower gap if necessary. I can see that Ms. Lam So Wai and Professor Chen Wing Kwong wish to speak for the second round. After Ms. Lam So Wai speaks, I will draw the line. Thank you, Ms. Lam So Wai. Thank you, Chair. I support the initiative to recruit nurses trained overseas and in other Greater Bay Area cities. I believe the administration does not have the concrete figures at the moment, but if they can provide them after the meeting, I would really appreciate it. So for some in the sector, they have told me that they do have some nurses who were trained in other Greater Bay Area cities work in their wards, and they said they have seen that they have difficulties working here because a lot of the documents are in English. And for mainland nurses, let me just say that I have heard some of these nurses tell me they had trouble reading the English documents. And perhaps the arrangement of the documents also pose difficulties to them. So if you have documents in English, for example, diagnoses made by doctors and all the other writing made by ancillary medical professionals or allied health professionals, they are all in English. So how can you facilitate these nurses working in wards and in the clinical setting in general? It would be hard for them to adjust, and in fact there are other nurses who have told me that they have difficulties, and some of their colleagues are not very helpful with this. So we have all along been using English. If these nurses cannot adjust to a setting in which the medium used is English, would there be more medical errors that are going to happen? Also, I want to ask about the incident that happened in United Christian Hospital. It was the case in which a nurse did not enter certain data and the medical practitioner was not aware of significant, important data of the patient, thus causing the death of the patient. I'm not sure whether any follow-up actions have been taken by the hospital authority. But this is very serious. A nurse did not detect the vital signs of symptoms of pneumonia causing this issue. We do not want the same or similar incidents happening again. I think it is not inappropriate to deal with individual cases because I think the review committee is looking into this. I think the Deputy Secretary can answer the rest of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In the bill, we introduced new pathways to import more nurses. I believe they will be subject to the regulation of the Nursing Council of Hong Kong. So in case of any medical blunders or incidents, the Nursing Council will deal with these cases based on the existing mechanism. They protect the interests of patients as well as their health. For non-locally trained nurses, how can we help them settle into Hong Kong? That is the clinical environment in Hong Kong. In this connection, the HA has been drawing on their experience to make enhancements. In the future, the DOH will also help these nurses settle into the clinical environment in Hong Kong. Dr. Denny Tong, anything to add? In addition to the HA initiatives, I'd like to clarify the situation with GBA nurses. Regarding the situation mentioned, I believe those are just the feelings of some colleagues. There are many members who were in touch with GBA nurses. The situation wasn't like, as member mentioned, we have induction programs, introducing them to CMS, and so on. The scheme has entered the second phase. The first phase was very good, so we had confidence and increased the quota of the second phase to 100. We are even seeking expansion in some specialities. In terms of language requirements, we shortlisted these nurses. We have interviews, written examinations, and so on. They have good communication skills. We have been collecting feedback from, for example, service users. If the situation were really that serious, there would have been reports in news. Well, I remember while I was working as an MO, nurses also wrote down the clinical medical record in Chinese. Professor Chen, I'd like to follow up on manpower. We lack manpower. Has the HA identified any manpower they'd like to target? Just as we were discussing, be it training or language requirement in mainland, they are doing quite well. They use bilingual teaching. For nurses in the mainland, their working environment is even better than that in Hong Kong. Their working environment, accommodation, work pressure, all of these aspects are better than those in Hong Kong. Can we improve these aspects so that we can retain our talents in Hong Kong and at the same time attract more talents or nursing talents to Hong Kong? Thank you, Chairman. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. As I understand, the HA is preparing for recruitment, whether inside Hong Kong or out of Hong Kong. We can tell the good stories of employing nursing talents from outside Hong Kong. We don't wait until the enactment of the bill before we start recruitment. On improving the working environment for nurses, we had different discussions. We have a lot of different training programs, work arrangements, and enhancement measures in this regard. But at present, we have a manpower crunch. Even if we want to let nurses go to training to further study, with a manpower crunch, it's quite difficult to do so. So we'd like to improve the nursing manpower situation in Hong Kong. So when the frontline situation improves, we have more room to do so. Dr. Danny Tong. On two aspects. First of all, as Elaine said, we have an international talent recruitment office. We have taken stock of our experience. The earlier we start, the more results we can get. The UK, the US, Australia, Canada, we also consider these countries. Just now, member mentions nurses that served in Hong Kong or served in these countries. We also consider these nurses. So we have already finished policy discussion. We'll now move on to clause-by-clause scrutiny. Please refer to CB brackets 3947/2023, the bill. And the marked up copy provided by the Legislative Secretariat. The Secretariat wrote to the administration on the 18th of January. We have already received a written reply from the administration. That is CB brackets 4330/2024 brackets 01. The legal advisor once again wrote to the administration on the 21st of March 2024. That is CB brackets 4356/2024 brackets 01. The administration replied to us today. If need be, the legal advisor can ask questions in the course of clause-by-clause scrutiny. May I invite the administration to walk us through the clause-by-clause scrutiny, please? Thank you, Chairman. I'll now walk members through the Chinese provisions of the bill. Apart from clause 1 bracket 3, Part 1 Preliminary, Short Title and Commencement. This ordinance may be cited as the Nurses Registration Amendment Ordinance 2023. Subject to subsection bracket 3, this ordinance comes into operation on the day on which it is published in the Gazette. This bill aims to amend the Nurses Registration Ordinance and its subsidiary legislation to provide for new types of registration known as special registration, limited registration, and temporary registration, as well as new types of enrollment known as special enrollment, limited enrollment, and temporary enrollment. It also aims to authorize the Nursing Council of Hong Kong to provide information to the Secretary for Health, to empower the Secretary for Health to give directions to the Nursing Council of Hong Kong, and to provide for transitional and related matters. Any question, members? If there's no question, let's continue. Just now, we were on the preliminary of Part 1. We mainly want to prescribe the enactment date and the commencement date. The following provisions come into operation on a date to be appointed by the Secretary for Health by notice published in the Gazette. In this connection, the Assistant Legal Advisor on the 18th of January wrote to the administration, and in our reply, we already replied to the Secretariat. We explained the reasons. Simply put, it takes time to prepare for operational concerns. So this bill will not go into effect until a certain date because we need to pave way for the introduction of licensing examination or certificates. Please refer to CB brackets 457/2024/01. Now, on Part 2, amendments to Nurses Registration Ordinance, Cap 164, it involves amending the original provisions of principal legislation, a total of 45 ordinances, including 3 schedules. From page 1 to page 6, it involves amendments in Part 2. Clauses 2A, 2B, and 2C all concern the interpretations. The aim of the amendments is to facilitate the new registration and enrollment modes. First of all, we have limited enrollment, limited registration, special enrollment, special registration, and we also add interpretations. They are on page 2 to page 3. In relation to the new arrangements of registration or enrollment, there are specified forms. It means a form specified by the Council under Section 28 that involves the form of instruments to allow the Nursing Council of Hong Kong to require applicants to submit different information. That's also on page 3. The legal advisor has some questions. Thank you, Chairman. On the proposed new Clause 2C, we wrote to the administration for some inquiries. The inquiries are in paragraph 5 of CB brackets 457/2024 brackets 03. By way of Gazetted, some institutions can be designated as designated institutions. We asked why it was not subsidiary legislation. The administration has already replied to us. CB brackets 4330/2024 brackets 01. And a reply from the administration.
Thank you. We have explained our considerations in our response. Thank you. I think with the interpretation for recognized training courses, in relation to a qualification obtained by an applicant for special registration or limited registration means a course of training carried out in Hong Kong that is recognized by the council for full registration. And there's also point B that is more or less similar in wording for special registration, special enrollment or limited enrollment nurses. But for full registration or enrollment, they have made use of a different term that is prescribed course or prescribed training. I believe we will cover that later. But I think that the two are equivalent. That is recognized training course and a prescribed course or training. Why is it that different terms are used to refer to the same courses? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. For the qualifications recognized for full registration or enrollment that is prescribed training, at the moment, we do not have any new pathways for this. This is what is in existing legislation. So why is it that we have a new term recognized training course here? It's because we want to make sure it is clear that when it comes to non-local courses, the contents of the courses would have to be broadly comparable to the recognized training courses. We want to make such differentiation. That is, these courses would have to be broadly comparable to the curriculum of recognized training courses. We want to make a differentiation from existing pathways because the expression of prescribed training has been used for a long time. And as I understood, in the existing legislation, apart from the local qualifications that are said to be recognized by the council, it would also include some training courses provided by other institutions. So we do not wish to confuse what we have, the new provisions that we have with existing arrangements. So we want to make a distinction that we would have a new definition that is for recognized training courses. So I think that since you are more or less referring to the same courses, why not amend the definition of prescribed training so that all of the references of prescribed training would also refer to recognized training courses? It's just my suggestion. We did consider whether it is necessary to make an alignment, that is to change the wording of prescribed training to recognized training courses. But after we have looked at our existing workflow, it would take much time to communicate with the nursing council to see how we can make a change that would match their needs. So I think that since this is going to make the process longer, we think it is not necessary to include it in the bill at this stage, as it is not the focus of the bill anyway. Thank you. Also, we have added interpretations for special registration or enrollment earlier. We have also included definition for specified institutions. That is an institution specified in Schedule 1 that would include institutions of the Department of Health as well as the hospital authority. And we have also included a definition for designated institution. That is, one should refer to Section 2C1. That is an institution that would be specified in Part 1 of Schedule 2. Any institution that falls within any of the categories of institutions specified in Part 2 of Schedule 2. An institution designated as such by the Secretary by notice published in the Gazette, or an institution is designated as such by the Director of Social Welfare by notice published in the Gazette. And that would also include various institutions such as the scheduled nursing homes. That is institutions that would make sure it is qualification that can be limited on limited registration or enrollment. Well, Deputy Secretary, let me interrupt you here. We should be conducting a clause-by-clause examination, but I don't think we are looking at the clauses one by one at the moment. Well, thank you, Chair, but what we were referring to earlier were all on page 6 of the marked-up copy. Excuse me, where were you? A designated institution, that is adding a definition for designated institution. Chair, I think we can just look at the clauses one by one. We do not need to cross-reference to another part at this stage. I think we haven't talked about clause 2B either, right? I think we were on well, if you don't mind, can we go back to 2A section, the proposed section 2A? Yes, section 2.8 references relating to registration of nurses. Well, it is for the purposes of this ordinance. As said, references relating to registration of nurses. Well, okay, members, do you wish to make any comments regarding the proposed section 2A? If not, please proceed to proposed section 2B. Deputy Secretary. Well, let's go with the explanation clause by clause. All right, the proposed section 2B is the references relating to enrollment of nurses. That is A person with full enrollment is a person whose name is contained in Division 1 of the role. B, a person with special enrollment is a person whose name is contained in Division 2 of the role. C, a person with limited enrollment is a person whose name is contained in Division 3 of the role. And D, a person with temporary enrollment is a person whose name is contained in Division 4 of the role. And references to full enrollment, special enrollment, limited enrollment, and temporary enrollment are to be construed accordingly. All right, 2C, meaning of designated institution. For the purposes of this ordinance, an institution is a designated institution if A, it is specified in Part 1 of Schedule 2, B, it falls within any of the categories of institution specified in Part 2 of Schedule 2. C, it is designated as such by the Secretary by notice published in the Gazette, or D, it is designated as such by the Director of Social Welfare by notice published in the Gazette. And 2, a notice published under subsection 1C or D is not subsidiary legislation. All right, please proceed. And then it would be Part 2. We only have a simple amendment here. So on pages 8 to 11 of the marked up copy in the Chinese version, we have relating to section 4B. So say for 32DB, it is because we have some new interpretations. That's why there is a consequential amendment. And other is also a consequential amendment. Let me read that out. On page 8 of the marked up copy, that is DB, it would be that one member will be nominated by the hospital authority and appointed by the chief executive, and we will remove the reference for the hospital authority. And for E, a member must be a registered nurse and has experience or the qualifications to take care of mentally incapacitated persons. Let me say also for CA, relating to the 6 members must be registered nurses. And must be appointed some time ago. I think this was from the Nurses Registration Amendment Ordinance 1997 that have yet to come into effect. Will you deal with this in the meantime? And if once we have new provisions, will the Nursing Council proceed with the work? Thank you. Upon passing of the bill, we will follow up with the Nursing Council on the provisions that have yet to come into effect. Thank you. Any comments from members? If not, we'll proceed. All right. Page 11 of the marked up copy. Excuse me. That will be the new section 4B. That is, Council may provide information to Secretary. The Council may provide any information to the Secretary if the Secretary requests the information for the formulation of healthcare policies. We want to set a legislative framework so that when the Secretary for Health wants to obtain information, such information must have a connection to the formulation of healthcare policies. So this is a new arrangement. Any questions from members? If not, we'll proceed. All right. We'll move on to page 2 of the marked up copy in the Chinese version. And then these amendments relate to sections 5 to 7 for the management of registered nurses. So section 5, 1 and 2, there will be some amendments. For example, for section 5.1, the Council shall cause a register to be kept which shall contain such particulars as may from time to time be prescribed, we have repealed from time to time be described when substituted it with be specified by the council. And for section 5.2, we have added divisions, and we have also amended section 6 information with respect to nurses.
The register or a copy of the register must be kept at the offices of the council and must, except for Division 4 of the register, be open to inspection by any person free of charge during usual business hours upon application being made in writing addressed to the Secretary. Subsection 2, the council must cause to be published in the Gazette in relation to successive periods in such manner as the council may think fit, and at intervals of not more than 12 months, lists of all persons whose names have been entered in, removed from, or restored to Division 1, 2, or 3 of the register during these periods. Well, I'd like to ask, for those whose names are removed, there should also be announcements. Is that correct? I know there's no amendment about this. Well, the Secretary may tell us the existing situation. Well, every year, well, I should put it this way, for nurses whose names have been removed, we put the names of the existing registered and enrolled nurses on the list. So for those who have been removed from the register, their names will not appear on the register. Well, I understand, but then you have to announce the names, announce the persons whose names have been removed from the register. That means you need to have a list telling people who are removed from the register. Well, I think this is quite special, hence my question. Well, Chairman, currently, we don't have a list showing the name of the persons who have been removed. Well, but that is a legal requirement. Well, except there are disciplinary hearings, and afterwards, the names of the nurses have been removed, then there is a list. Well, there are no other requirements. There are no such requirements in other ordinances. So do we really need to keep persons whose names have been removed? Do we need to keep it? Well, we need to go back and check. I believe this is public information. The aim is that we need to make public this information. People can make comparisons between the two lists. That is the before and after list. But whether we need to make a separate list or not, we can go back and study this. Thank you, Chairman. Other members, any question? If no, let's continue. On page 14, amendment to section 7. That's amendment in relation to the Nurses Registration Ordinance in 1997. So in subsection 3, we have already made amendments. The Council may order the removal from the register of the name of any person, A, who makes a written request addressed to the Secretary that the person's name be so removed, B, who is deceased, C, whose registration is no longer in force, D, who has failed to obtain a practicing certificate within 6 months after the date of the person's registration or after the expiry date of the last practicing certificate issued to that person, or E, who has not provided to the Secretary an address in Hong Kong at which notices from the Council may be served on the person. Subsection 4. For the purposes of subsection (3) a person is to be regarded as not having provided an address to the Secretary if (a) a registered letter is sent to the person at the last address provided by the person to the Secretary, and B, the person fails to acknowledge receipt of the letter within 12 months after the date on which the letter is sent to the person. what does it mean by a register letter is sent? Well, basically, when we have sent a register letter, it means, or we take it, that the person has already received or acknowledged the receipt of the registered letter. Any question, Mr. Benson Locke? Thank you, Chairman. On page 14, that is the Deputy Secretary was referring to. Subsection brackets 3 brackets E has failed to obtain well, according to the bill, let's take a look at 10 and 21. In 7.3d and 13.3d, has failed to obtain a practicing certificate issued under Section 10A within 6 months of his registration under Section 9 or of the expiry of such a certificate, then the person's name can be removed from the register. That way, we will have already dealt with those who have already left Hong Kong and have no plans to return to Hong Kong. So we do not need to retain the original subsection 3C. Page 16. From page 16 to 25, it details amendment to sections 8 and 9. There are also proposed new clauses 9A and 9B. First of all, regarding section 8 on page 16, we have added the word full, so the entire text reads eligibility for full registration. That is to make it different from other kinds of registration. So for section 8, it replaces the old 1A. Subsection 1, a person with special registration is eligible for full registration if A, the person has, within a period of time specified by the Council, served as a person with special registration in one or more specified institutions for at least 5 years in aggregate. B, the institution or each of the institutions certifies that it is satisfied with the person's performance by reference to the criteria specified by the Council, and C, the Council is satisfied that the person is of good character and has good professional conduct. Regarding A, within a period of time specified by the Council, how long is a period? Well, regarding this period of time, it refers to the time when one takes out an application for special registration. That is the period of employment. For people with special registration, they have a linked employment. So at least 5 years in aggregate. But it reads the person has within a period of time specified by the Council. It may be 5 or 6 years, within 10 years. They come to Hong Kong and then they go back to their own place and then they return to Hong Kong again. So probably when they come back to Hong Kong for a longer period of time, that is 4 years, I believe that's what you mean. But you should have given more details. It refers to the period of time recognized by the Council of Hong Kong, by the Nursing Council of Hong Kong, including when that person practices in his or her capacity as a special registration nurse. So probably in the past 10 years, that person holds a capacity of special registration for 5 years, or on and off in the past 10 to 20 years. As long as the number of years reach 5 years in aggregate, you still count that as eligible. Is that correct? When somebody comes to Hong Kong 1 year every 4 years, you don't count it. Is that correct? Well, I don't think so. The principle is that the gap should not be too long. Otherwise, one may fall out of touch with the clinical experience or clinical environment. We'll further flesh out the details when we go back. So the Nursing Council of Hong Kong can make the full decision. Is that correct? Yes, that's the case. We don't want to make the provisions too rigid. That is, whenever there are any breaks that would render the application not valid, we don't want to see this happen. Any other member? Deputy Chair Professor Chan. Well, I think the principle of continuity is very important to the at least 5 years in aggregate. If there are any breaks in the practicing period, it does not show whether that person is up to par in that period of 5 years in aggregate. It's good that it's not very clearly written to allow flexibility, but do we need to give it some other thought? Do we need to think about it further? Thank you, Professor Chan. Thank you, Chairman. The reason why we need to write down within a period of time specified by the Council, that is because we want to plug the loophole. If one holds special registration to come to Hong Kong for a short period of time, and they come to Hong Kong on and off after a long period of time, we do want to impose a requirement that is a period of time that the Council can specify. Well, in this case, why don't you write down for 5 years continuously? Well, as I said from the outset, the registration will be valid for 3 years. There may be changes in employers, for example, from the HA to the DOH. That may happen. Well, there may be breaks, and the breaks will cause the employment period to be not continuous. So any change in the job may render the application not valid. Probably some simply go back to their own place to deal with their household matters. For C, the Council is satisfied that the person is of good character and has good professional conduct. On what basis can the Council be satisfied so? According to the existing provision, there are also provisions in relation to good character. The Nursing Council of Hong Kong does have requirements to submit some information to prove good character. So we want to use the existing arrangements that the Nursing Council of Hong Kong is adopting. Any other questions? If no, let's continue. Moving on to 1A on page 16, Section A, subsection 1A. Any other person is eligible for full registration if A, either 1. The person has completed the prescribed training and has passed the examinations as may be required by the Council, or 2. The person possesses a valid certificate to practice nursing issued by a certifying body recognized by the Council from time to time, as constituting sufficient evidence of the person's competency to practice nursing, and B. The Council is satisfied that the person is of good character. For subsection 1A, broadly, it is in line with the existing practice of the eligibility for full registration, not the eligibility for special registration. Regarding subsection 1A, the Legal Service Division wrote to the administration twice. Before 1 p.m., we received a reply from the administration, which means that members have not yet received a reply. Can the administration follow up on this? Regarding those who seek full registration without going through special registration, why is the licensing or practicing examination not mandatory? If one wants to seek full registration through special registration for these locally trained nurses, they need to serve in specified institutions for at least 5 years. Can the administration explain to members? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Excuse me. The reply was given a little late. We have misunderstood the question of the legal advisor before, so I do apologize. Regarding what was said by the legal advisor, we are referring not to a new pathway in existing legislation. With the amendment, we want to make sure that candidates can still prove that they have the qualifications needed without taking a licensing examination. So in order to be eligible for full registration or enrollment, it should be in line, it should be different from those who are migrating to full registration or enrollment with a licensing examination. As said, for these special registration or enrollment nurses, they need to undergo work-based assessment. We think that is more appropriate because these nurses would have to work at the Department of Health or hospital authority for a set number of years, 5 years. So we want to make sure it is different and the distinction is made for the different arrangements. We do want to retain the existing pathway, however, because the arrangement is working at the moment. We think that this should not be changed because we have implemented new pathways. I do find this to be quite interesting because 81AA2, it does not really amend the original legislation. It was in 81G. That is, one has to possess a valid certificate to practice nursing issued by such certifying body as may be recognized by the Council from time to time as constituting sufficient evidence of his competency to practice nursing. And one would be qualified to register in Hong Kong to practice nursing. So even without the legislative amendment, a nurse can become a registered nurse without taking a licensing examination as long as one is of good character and has possessed this valid certificate to practice nursing. So I think the decision is to be made by the nursing council whether one has to take licensing examination. So I want to ask if there are such cases in which the nursing council is satisfied that there is no need for one to take a licensing examination. Well, thank you, Chair. We have some history behind this. In most cases, the nursing council will require one to take a licensing examination. So when there was mutual recognition of qualifications with other jurisdictions, the individuals would not need to take a licensing examination. But I think with this bill, the policy intent is to give power to the nursing council to see if it is necessary for one to take a licensing examination, and if an institution accepts that the qualifications are adequate, there is no need for one to take a licensing examination. We think that this should be retained. We want to introduce new pathways through the bill, which is why we do not wish to change this. So let me point out this. In the very early on stage, a paper was given by the administration to the panel on health services and this bills committee that for a nurse to become a practicing nurse in Hong Kong, one must take the licensing examination. So I think this was the information, or at least the version provided by the administration, but it seems to not be the case in existing legislation. One can become a practicing nurse as long as the nursing council decides that one does not need to take the licensing examination. I just want to point out this inaccuracy in the administration's version. Thank you, Chair. I think the framework is very clear. So the nursing council has the power to ask someone to take the licensing examination. And in the past decade or two, the nursing council would often require individuals to take the licensing examination. So I think with different medical professions, such as those for allied health professionals, we have similar arrangements. So the nursing council has the power to ask individuals to take the licensing examination. And I think to conform with the requirements of the sector, individuals are asked or were asked to take the licensing examination. We just want to provide through this bill a legislative framework that for those on special registration or enrollment or limited registration or enrollment, there is no need for them to take the licensing examination. We want to draw up the qualification requirements for these individuals, and for one to migrate to full registration or enrollment, we believe it is more appropriate to take the approach of work-based assessment, which is why we want to provide the legislative framework through this bill. Thank you, Mr. Lai Tong Kwok. The microphone of the member is not on. Thank you, Chair. Basically, the nursing council is to recognize certain training courses, and the certificates of these qualifications would qualify nurses to register in Hong Kong. In that case, why is it that you are saying that you are only proposing a legislative framework? It seems that you do not wish to implement the framework because you already have existing legislation that has the same effect. So if you do not plan on implementing it, why even propose it in the first place? So we have one that would require one to take a licensing examination, and the other path that does not require one to take the licensing examination. So when you're assessing qualifications from overseas, you are being very stringent, and you would only allow certain individuals with certain qualifications to pass to be qualified, and I would understand that. And as you may remember, Chair, we have a submission from an individual that the individual has completed a qualification overseas and has practiced multiple years in the jurisdiction, when they came back to Hong Kong, it was hard for the individual to register in Hong Kong because their applications were rejected by the Nursing Council, saying that they do not fulfill the practicum hour requirement. So it seems that the administration was not making use of existing legislation. So what's the point of us even looking at this bill? It even betrays your policy intent. So have you been performing the work that you're required to do? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member. We do understand the members' questions and for the concerns of certain nurses that have practiced overseas. Let me say this. For RRE nurses and SRE nurses, they are working in a restricted setting. They can only work in specified and designated institutions. They will be subject to certain conditions to be imposed. So this is different from the existing pathway for non-locally trained nurses attempting to register in Hong Kong. We have to make a distinction between those. We have different arrangements. So for SRE nurses or LRE nurses, we want to specify specifically that they do not need to take the licensing examination. There are other assessment criteria for these nurses. So it is very much different from those who are seeking full registration or enrollment after practicing overseas. So I do understand the members' concern, however, with the implementation. I think we can also follow up on whether the existing legislation is working to our intended effect. But let me emphasize that these are two different arrangements. This individual may not want to have special registration or enrollment or limited registration or enrollment. We have to follow up with the Nursing Council on this, but of course we will leave the decision to be made by the Nursing Council to assess whether the individual's qualifications, training, and experience are eligible for registration in Hong Kong. Thank you. I will follow up on this after the meeting. And as Mr. Lai asked, if you have a list of institutions that the Nursing Council has recognized the qualifications or certificates to practice nursing. Well, from what I know, from what I gleaned from the Secretariat, most individuals were asked to take the licensing examination. They did not refer specifically to which institutions the individuals got their qualifications from. So I think from what I know in the past, the Nursing Council did recognize the individual's qualifications while asking the individuals to take the licensing examination still. Thank you, Chair. I have a follow-up. Can I ask? So let me say this. So the answer is either yes or no. So either there are the individuals have to take the licensing examination, or they just don't need to take the licensing examination at all? Will the administration provide a written response after a meeting as to the current situation? And as of today, if no one has had the qualification or certificate to practice nursing recognized without the taking the licensing examination, the administration should just say that, and you should set out in detail how you will implement the arrangements in the bill. I think the Nursing Council also has the responsibility to explain in detail what arrangements they plan on implementing in future. The Nursing Council is asking for power to do this, and I think if you're asking us to grant you this power, we need more information to know if you will indeed implement the arrangements that are appropriate, and we need more details on this. It's not just about the general approach that you will take, because the details can really affect your implementation and the results. Of course, I'm sure members want this to be successful. We expect this at least. But we need to know how you'll go about doing it. Once we have the details, we can provide our feedback. We do understand that the power would rest with the Nursing Council. We do trust the council, but we have a reasonable expectation to know what you are planning to implement the arrangements, and the public would require you to provide more details. I think that's very important, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor, any response? Professor Tiwari? Well, I'm one of the examples. Back in 1997, back then the UK and Hong Kong had a reciprocal arrangement. So at university, while we were teaching at university back then, our employer, that is the university, would submit the application form to the Nursing Council of Hong Kong. After the discussion with the Nursing Council, the application would be considered one by one. There were not many applications back then. Only the Polytechnic and the CUHK offered offer nursing programs. Hong Kong U hadn't yet started offering such programs. After 1997, this pathway wasn't used. So I'm not saying that we couldn't use this pathway, but the number will be very small because we need to consider the cases on a case-by-case basis, one by one. For 81G, it was amended in 1995. So it's actually before 1997. Mr. Lai also asked about practicum hours. Can the administration tell us once again? All along, we are fleshing out the details. In some countries, the clinical hours may not reach the requirement of hours. So in case when the clinical hours do not suffice to satisfy our requirement, what should they do? We need to see whether the clinical hours are relevant to the position for which they are applying. Post-qualification experience counts as well? Yes. Well, I have a question about drafting. Counsel from time to time. That is in Chinese, 不时. As I understand from the professor, all the cases were dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And this is not in line with the legal requirements. Right now, it is written as 不时, from time to time. As I understand, depending on the situation, for example, University B in place A, for the talents who graduate from there, you recognize all of these talents. But after a period of time, University C is also recognized. Then you add University C as well. Or when University B of place A is no longer qualified, then you would take it out. That's not on a case-by-case basis. That's about the system. As I understand, the way you write the legislation, well, you need to write down that is, the graduates have competence to practice nursing, be it full registration or special registration. That's how I understand the provisions. If my understanding is correct, the Nursing Council needs to work on it. But of course, if my understanding is not correct, and if you are only dealing with the cases one by one, then you need to change the words to on a case-by-case basis instead of from time to time. We need to be strict. This is a piece of legislation. We can keep using our old mechanism when we have new legislation. That's not the case. If you want to use A, then you need to use A. You can choose to use B after you write down A in the legislation. You need to go back and think how you will deal with this. Well, we don't have much time left. There's another meeting at 4:30. So after Professor Chen asks a question, well, Chairman, I'd like to follow up on Mr. Lai's question. If we know that there's a lack of nurses and we have a piece of new legislation allowing us to recognize non-locally trained nurses, if we are not going to use this ordinance and we need to mandate these non-locally trained nurses come to Hong Kong and work in a Hong Kong specified institution for a period of 5 years, is it not necessary? Indeed, we have a piece of good legislation for institutions in the mainland or other places. Many nurses graduating from these institutions are also qualified. Just like Chinese Medicine Council, over 30 institutions are recognized. Then you can recognize these institutions. We'll be able to solve the manpower crunch of nurses. We can take a two-pronged approach. If we lack nurses, why don't we go about doing this in this manner? This way, it can help us solve the manpower crunch of nurses. Administration, after your reply, will adjourn a meeting. Thank you, Professor Chan. We'll go back and study the issue. We'll supply members with information to see how we can implement the regulations. We'll go back and afterwards we'll provide members with information regarding what Professor Chen and Mr. Lai mentioned. We write down certifying body recognized from time to time. It's not about training organization. Probably the nursing council certifies that a person has the competency to practice nursing. So it's not the training institution or university that recognizes the person. That's what I understand. In any event, for this existing pathway, non-locally trained nurses can also use this pathway. It's not the case that we need to open up a new pathway, for example, special registration or limited registration, to do something unnecessary or duplicate. That's totally different from our policy objective. Their practice will be restricted. There are limitations for limited registration or enrollment and limited registration or enrollment. The reason why we propose a special mechanism is that we need to satisfy the new pathway policy objective. So members may remember limited registration or enrollment cannot move on to seek full registration or enrollment. Mainly, they replenish the existing nursing pool. We want to meet the objective of the policy. For the existing pathway, in the course of execution, probably we can further improve it. But it does not conflict with the existing pathway or the policy objective. We can go back and study this issue, and we can also supply more information to members. Professor Chan, in other words, when the Nursing Council of Hong Kong recognizes the practicing qualifications of the nurses, then you can allow these nurses to practice as nurses in Hong Kong. Is that correct? For example, when you recognize the institutions in the mainland, then you can allow these mainland trained nurses to work in Hong Kong. That also applies to overseas jurisdictions. Then we don't need to worry about a manpower crunch in nurses. We can recruit nurses with these channels. Is it better than the legislative amendment? At least we can solve the manpower crunch facing nurses. We have 2 minutes. A quick reply. Deputy Secretary, the provisions are written by the Nursing Council. They play the gatekeeper role. They have their own concerns or considerations. In the course of execution, the professional system of nurses varies from one place to another. So we need to take stock of the situation and consider the training situation in different countries and make a decision. Well, let's save it for the next meeting. Actually, we have a piece of good legislation to solve the manpower crunch of nurses. So we shouldn't give rise to protectionism, so to speak. In the mainland or in overseas jurisdictions, the standard of healthcare is very high. So why don't we use the existing legislation to give effect to the ordinance to solve the manpower crunch? Why do we need to use legislation to solve the problem? Probably we can come back to this issue in the next meeting. So in the next meeting, we'll come back to this point. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.